Good morning, everyone. We will begin the February 27th Policy Committee meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and we'll begin with the approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, has everyone had a chance to read the January 23rd minutes? And do you have any recommendations or changes?
I forgot to mention this to Michelle. I have one recommended change under 5, where it says policies in item A through E listed below will go to the board for review. I would say as amended during discussion.
Anything else?
I move we approve the minutes with that change.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we will now discuss the policies for second review out of Chapter 3.
Okay, you have 5 policies for a second review. As Ms. Heintel pointed out, we did amend these prior to them going to the board for review. I've received no other recommended changes from board members, the community stakeholders at all. And we would request that these go to the board for approval at the March meeting, the March 5th meeting.
So moved.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll send A through E to the March board meeting. Okay, we will now move to policies for first review out of Chapter 4.
Okay.
1 out of 5.
The first one is 4-1 attendance. And I know that you all approved this policy back in June of last year. However, the exam exemption component has continued to raise concerns. So we reopened this policy and have made some proposed revisions, including addressing the exam exemption component. And so that's for your review today. And I can discuss any particular questions or concerns. One of the significant changes that we are recommending, and we met with Dr. Breedlove and Dr. Bowers and Dr. Baisden, getting some input regarding the exam exemptions, both kind of from their principal hats, their high school principal hats, and from their current roles, and determined that perhaps as opposed to having concerns about excused absences, because we had issues with students with disabilities, religious absences, that perhaps the exam exemption, since the goal is to improve attendance, should just really deal with unexcused absences. And so that's the recommended change, is that students have unexcused absences, not excused absences, to count against it. And so because we were no longer counting excused absences, the recommendation is to reduce the number of absences as well. The other change in this was really what we have found, putting the things up on the policy manual, that footnotes don't show up as well, and they're more difficult to incur. So we started I'm going to start putting the footnotes back into the body of the policy as well.
I have a question.
Yes.
Under the definitions of excused absences, absences due to extended illness may also require a statement from a physician. Do we want to define that more, that if you're out more than X number of days, or do we not do that because of flu and stuff like that? On the front, I'm sorry,
yeah,
under B.
I don't know that I don't think there's a specific reason why we don't define that.
Okay.
We certainly can.
Okay. It's something to think about, because I just thought, well, maybe you can't, like, if your student's out for 2 weeks for the flu, they may not take the student to the doctor just because they know it's the flu. So I guess
yeah, and sometimes children run a fever for a day or two, and parents keep them home but don't necessarily, go to the doctor.
Yeah,
I can do over the counter.
This is for extended, so I guess I expected extended to be like how long? 2 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
A week? What? At what point do you require a note, I guess is what I'm saying. 2 weeks, is it? Because if you have the flu, you're going to be out for a whole week, but you may not go to the doctor. But I think at some point, defining extended absence.
We could say greater than 5 school days, because it does also have the may language. So if the principal knows that it's
Okay.
it's permissive language, so it doesn't require it.
And maybe that's something to just have a talk with the principals about, so it's more consistent across the district.
Okay.
So other than the excused absence thing, which thank you for fixing that, it's good that excused absences now. So we changed the exam exemptions for 90 and above to 2 unexcused absences. So excused absences do not count. And then 80 or above, 1 unexcused absence. And again, excused doesn't count. My thing that I hear most from parents about is college visits, scholarship interviews, and once you've been accepted to college, a college visit to that university. I don't know why universities and colleges don't do it on the weekends so the kids don't have to miss school. But can we have, so I like the 2 practice, can we have 1 like college visit acceptance under here too? Just because there's visits, but then if they've been accepted, I'm hearing that colleges have like a day where the student can go and be at the school and find out what it's going to look
almost like a pre-orientation.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and we did have extensive conversations about that. And, those in the room, we've all had, well, 2 of us have had kids who've gone through the process,
Right.
Multiple kids, and then kind of the experience of the principals. And most colleges do have weekend opportunities. And I know with my sons, with all their college visits, we only had one of my boys miss 1 day of school for a college visit. And I had the scholarship interviews. I had all of those things.
I like that we added scholarship interviews.
Yeah. So we don't know necessarily that it's a required thing that we have more than those. So we certainly, if the policy committee wants to add more, we can do that. I think a lot of students who need more than that go through that number 8, which is the valid educational opportunity option. And so they can use that one for those college visits as well.
And I'm good with that, as long as there's consistency amongst the high schools for granting that. And if there's not, then there may be one high school that's like, okay, you're right, I'll give you an excused absence for that. But another one may say, well, it's not one of the enumerated things. But if that's something that you guys can take care of at the principals meeting, I'm good with that. But I agree with you, that would fall under valid educational opportunity.
Yeah.
So I just want to clarify. Parents and students are planning college visits, perhaps, on a school day. They have to go get permission from their principal prior in order for it to be excused.
Yes. So there's a form, I think, that they use, and I know that's what I use for my son.
There's a form that you have to bring back from the college you're at that you were there.
Okay, we just did a college visit. I'm on my 2nd high school student, and I've never seen that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess I just was not aware. Okay, so do we need to include language in here so that parents and students know that there's a form?
This policy goes right to the handbook every year, so it will be in there. Now,
okay, college visits approved in advance by the principal. Okay, so you don't think it's necessary to include the fact that there's a form that has to be submitted?
and I don't know, and perhaps Dr., I don't know if all the schools use a form or if an email, some principals accept an email. I don't know how the process from the counseling department works.
Forms taken note of the principal that it was
There has to be consistency.
You know, honestly, it just seems like similar to an illness. If a student was out and they bring information back from the university that that's where they were, it seems like that would then allow them to be excused or not excused. To do all that legwork before, I'm just curious how well that works, how efficient or effective
I agree with
that
you,
is.
especially since it's only 2 per academic year. So why would we not, like you were saying, let the parents just write a note that they were on a college visit and an email from the college that you scheduled it?
I mean, because we just got back from NC State. I have plenty of documentation from that visit that we were at NC State. Could we just not turn that in like a doctor's note or something in order to have that absence excused? Or do we want to stick with what you already have in place and do the pre-work in order to be absent?
Why do we need prior approval?
Right, that's what.
And why is it different at every school? That concerns me.
I do think there are some inconsistencies
Okay.
there, but having pre-approval does help build sort of that relationship between the principal and the students, and also, hey, make sure that you tell your teachers that you're going to be out. So that communication ahead of time, so that missing work can be made up. Those type of things. That's as a former principal, that's the conversation. Oh, you're going to NC State. Okay. Yeah. Tell me about what you're interested in. And it does force a conversation between the student and the school, but is it absolutely necessary? No, but there has to be some sort of documentation that child went on.
I guess my only pushback on that would be, that doesn't happen every time.
No, sir.
And realistically, we know that there are going to be parents that just doesn't happen. And I'm willing to believe that if we had a parent who came in with the documentation after the visit and didn't get said prior approval, we would make that an excused absence.
Yes, sir. We would.
So having that in the policy, I don't know if, my opinion, I don't know if that's even needed in the policy.
And I guess I just would point out that we also have that for the valid educational opportunity, because these are ones that you've planned that you're going to be out. And so do you want it? Do you want to strike it in both? I guess is what I would.
Right. And also, if we're going to rely on valid educational opportunity, those should be some of the examples as well, not just the legislative or governor's page. So if they're going for a school acceptance thing, that the only time they can go is a school day, it should be listed, in my opinion, it should be listed under there. But I agree with you. I guess, yeah.
So one recommendation that I would have is, it says up to 2 per academic year in both the junior and senior year, approved by the principal, and strike in advance. I mean, who cares if they can approve it before, they can approve it after, they can talk to their teachers and let them know why they're absent. Maybe just strike in advance. Would that help?
And do you want me to strike that from number 8 as well?
Yes. I mean, that would be my recommendation.
I think obviously from an implementation, we still want to encourage and have our principals and teachers encourage their students to let them know in advance, but having it being kind of a formal policy.
I guess the only reason I don't like it struck in 8 is because if at some point if you are a kid who wants to use the exemption in here, you want to know if it's going to be excused or not at some point. I mean, I know that there's principals out there that consider a valid educational opportunity a Disney cruise if they write a paper about it. Yeah, we need more consistency, especially at high school because of the exam exemption. I mean, I don't know. I guess the only reason I like prior approval there is it's a little bit more fuzzy.
Okay,
I'm not speaking well today.
So I agree. Keep it in 8.
Okay.
But I agree
with it in 7.
In
Yep.
7, my question is do principals have the time to have these one-on-one conversations with 400 or 500 seniors? Or should it say principals or guidance office? Okay. Good point. The first thing that crossed my mind was their guidance advisor. So should it helping them with their college stuff?
Should it be the principal or designee then?
Okay.
Okay. I just want to ask on the last page under H, I had a teacher, I'm going to just put it out there, tell me that we weren't clear that students could still take the test if they wanted to at the end of the year, even if they met the exemption. I think the wording says that will not be required, but I just wanted to throw it out there. Okay. So
they are allowed to take it. It just will not hurt them.
Right.
If they can't hurt them. It can't be a penalty.
Right. So the question that I have now, if we've discussed this, is do we try to fast track this for this semester? I had a conversation with Dr. Houlihan and Ms. Morris, and I guess I would like to know what the principals would think about that, if it would be too difficult because we're already 5 weeks into the second semester, and to hear what you guys think. But I mean, I like the rewrite of this a lot, and I would like to see it implemented, but I would like to hear some feedback.
I would absolutely be open to having this approved or considered by the board for this semester. I mean, why wait? It's already in place. We're just tweaking it. Any thoughts?
I don't know. As I told Ms. Heintel, I don't know the pros and cons. I need to hear from those that have kind of boots on the ground to understand the impact this may or may not have with regards to year-long courses versus semester courses. And unless Dr. Breedlove has an initial reaction right now,
I'd like to hear from her.
I'll put you on the spot.
Twice now.
My initial reaction is obviously principals and schools, they are very resilient and they can do whatever the board decides to do. I would be hesitant only because we don't know all of the side effects of doing that. We haven't really thought through all of that. And plus, first semester versus second semester, and any changes that you make now may affect, while it goes into effect this semester, it may be unfair, maybe to students that may have benefited from first semester, but they didn't get a chance to have an exam exemption because of a change that was made compared to students now. And just some of that inconsistency may play out in the school environment. So that's my only hesitation.
And I've thought about that, the inconsistency, but sometimes you learn stuff as you go through it. And I think that that's what we've kind of done. So I would like to try to fast track it, but subject to you guys having conversations with high school principals that whether or not, I don't know, I'm a parent who turns in notes all the time, whether or not it counts or not. I just do. If Grace has been, or my kids have been out of
school. Schools love that, by the way, yes.
I turn that in. But I don't want them to have a headache with parents who didn't do that because they didn't think it mattered for purposes of exam exemptions or anything. So I would like to make a motion to fast track this to the full board, subject to, conditioned upon, whatever word is, conversations that you have with principals unfortunately, between now and Tuesday. And maybe you can get back to us, one of us, and we can spread the word amongst the three of us. If the answer comes back from the principals that it's not something they think is going to work this semester, then we should know that, and then we will just send this to the board for first review.
That'd be very helpful, yes.
We can get on this today.
Is that fair?
And that's fair. Okay. And I think unless there is subject to any significant reason why we can't, if there is such reason, we'll communicate that to this committee by end of this week.
That would be great.
And let you know. Great. Otherwise, we'll move forward and have it at the board meeting on Tuesday.
And Dr. Breedlove, as far as like the fall versus the spring, I absolutely hear the challenge that you present. But I remember a conversation that we had one time when Math 1 was not honors, and then all of a sudden it was changed to honors. So the kids that had already taken Math 1 did not get the honors credit, and then the students that came in behind them did have the opportunity to take it for honors credit, and we had no problem with making that change. So I absolutely hear what you're saying, you know, for the students that took it in the fall versus students that might be taking it in the spring. But the precedence is already there that we have made changes where students that came in after got credit that students that had already completed it did not receive that opportunity. So in this particular case, I think it's okay to improve what we've already got.
Yes, ma'am. We can make it work for sure.
So would you prefer I take the condition off?
Oh, no.
I want some feedback first.
We'll take the feedback, absolutely. But again, I'm with you. I think if we can improve this policy, then why delay? And we've improved Math 1 without any problems, so why delay? It's just unfortunate some kids did not receive that opportunity. So I just wanted to share that example that, you know, the precedence is out there that we're willing to improve when we have a chance. And, you know, some kids get the opportunity and some, you know, some may not. But I think we have an opportunity to make this better.
All right.
Again, unless there is a significant reason why we believe we shouldn't, we'll let you all know by the end of this week. One question that I have for clarification, and I don't know if this needs to be part of the motion. One question that might come up is effective when? Would this policy be effective if approved Tuesday on Tuesday moving forward, or retroactive to the beginning of this semester?
I agree.
Retroactive. So I don't know if that needs to be.
But again, it's the student and the parent's responsibility to turn in the notes.
Right.
And if they haven't, then they don't get it.
I agree. I'm just thinking that a principal may have that
I thought it was
question.
clear that I wanted to go back 5 weeks to the beginning.
Just want to make sure.
My motion is to fast track it, so there would only be one read at the Board of Education, subject to something big that we are not aware of.
And the only substantive change is the excused versus the unexcused for exam exemptions. So that should not be that doesn't have to be the end of the semester anyway. So really, that shouldn't make a difference.
Okay, so.
And again, it only works if the student and the parents submit their interview information from the university and their visit information. So, okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
So that'll take us, we can move on to 4 age requirements for attendance.
I didn't think we got a second in it.
Oh,
Did we?
do we have a second? Okay.
Sorry, we already voted. Sorry. Did we vote? Oh, okay.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
So 3-0 fast track to the full board. Okay, good.
Okay. And we'll move on to the next policy, 4-4.
4-4, the changes that I made were to put this policy in compliance with statute. Under discretionary enrollments, we had the policy confused the way the statute reads, so I tried to fix that. And then under evidence of age, there's some clarification in the statute that I thought was important for us to have as part of it, and we didn't address the foster care or homeless students at all in the policy. So those are the proposed changes for that, and we'd ask for that to go for review. I don't know if you want to take the rest together.
Yeah, let's take the rest together.
I have no comments on that one.
Okay. The next is 4-5, immunization requirements for school admission. I am proposing to change the title since it also has the health assessment and screenings in there. It didn't make sense not to deal with that as well. We did not have the language under immunization, which is required by statute for the removal for 30 days in the event of the failure to provide the immunization. And I thought it was important that parents knew that was a requirement. And then we also did not have the foster care language that's required. So I proposed adding those
I have no comments on that one. Candace, anything? No, okay.
Okay. The next policy is 4-14 student records. You will see there's some other, part of the policy and things that are in red are due to me shifting things so that they made sense organizationally, because this policy was a little bit confusing, and then I added some headings and those kinds of things to clarify. And then there's also the removal of the survey information, which, as you saw, we're proposing being a separate policy because it really is not apples and apples. I'm not sure why they were put together in the first place. So there's not much as far as real substantive changes. Just ensuring that we had all the requirements for different records in here.
So you and I talked about the parent deleting the word natural.
Yeah, where was that? I'm sorry. I don't,
It's in B. Or guardian, or it has the word natural in it.
yeah, which doesn't make sense as to
which
why that's
doesn't make
there.
sense.
I think I'm going to put includes a. I'm just going to put that parent includes a guardian or
Right.
and because a parent
I think it's a parent.
a parent's a parent.
Yeah.
An adoptive or biological
Adoptive or
parent
biological.
includes a guardian or individual acting as a parent. So we're just
Right.
going to strike that language completely.
And I guess anywhere there's superintendent, principal, or other people, just add / designee, because
Yeah.
it, just in case there's that. When we talk about under 8, the juvenile records, and maybe elsewhere that I don't see it, when there transfers to another school, not in our district, right? That's what we're referring to, because we can transfer kids among schools within our own, I'm sorry,
No.
the last paragraph. Half the way up, if the student graduate on under 8, juvenile records,
The student graduates would also transfer to the school.
not within our district,
Sure.
right?
Yep, that's,
Because we would have to give let's say they transferred from one school within Union County to another, we'd have to send the juvie transcripts to the new principal. And that was all I had.
yeah, the way the statute reads is that that's then juvenile services responsibility to send to the transferring school. And I'll check to make sure. I think we can probably transfer it within the district. I'll just make sure that's clear under the statute.
One of the things I asked Michelle too, under the juvenile thing, Melissa, was that it states that we added that the principal shall not make a copy of such documents referring to juvenile court. And I said, I just want to make sure there's an out for central office to get a copy of the juvenile record or report, to make sure that somebody above that is informed of it.
Do we want to define who in central office gets that? Would it be,
Or do you, yeah,
Paragraph that B below where it says a specific need to know in order to protect the safety of the student and others.
there's an and there though. Should there be an or? Because in the next paragraph, there's an or.
Sure, we can add an or to that.
Can you do and or?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Because that's where you get to the folks like Jared or Don and those things. But the language that says the principal shall not make a copy is what's required under law. So I don't want to
mess with that. But I'm
Okay.
good if you add or.
Yeah.
Because I never knew that would be. Okay.
Yeah, the juvenile records they're very.
Protected,
Yeah,
Well, because they get expunged.
Right.
You don't want too many people to have.
correct.
I have a question on page 2
Oh, sorry.
under, were you still?
Nope.
Under cumulative records. I was just curious, what is an example or examples of follow-up records at the end of that paragraph? What else could there be? What are follow-up records? Do you know?
I don't.
Okay.
It's the language
It's a
that.
statute.
it's-
Oh,
yeah.
okay. So you got this from the state or
Most of it's
something?
from the-
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha, okay.
I don't.
I mean, because there's so much listed there. I was like,
Correct.
what else
could
could
be
that
else?
be?
Yeah.
I had some questions.
Doctor's notes?
Right.
And some of it may,
Okay.
it may just be kind of a miscellaneous
Okay.
catch-all category, but
There was
Yeah.
something on something else that I asked her about, and I'm like, this makes no sense because it's a statute wording.
Okay.
Never mind.
Very good. Yeah, never mind.
Never mind.
Okay.
Somebody thought it was important at some point.
That was all my questions on that one.
Okay.
Candace, you're good? Good.
Okay, the next is a proposed new policy surveys of students, and that is essentially the language that was in the student records policy into its own. The only additional provision is when you start at the bottom of page 1, the collection of student data for marketing purposes. We generally get asked to do surveys or provide information when we are supporting a new curriculum or those kinds of things. And we do provide non-identified, and I'm looking at Dr. Bowers to make sure I'm right, to use in some of those situations. And also, there's also the situations like colleges and those kinds of things. That it's all the confidential information is removed. It is scrub data, but we did want to make sure that folks knew that some of that stuff was being used.
And where is this recommendation for this new policy coming from?
Well, it's coming from my review of policies because the A part was within policy 4-14 student records, and because student surveys is not student records, I've had concerns in the past. Parents have called and said, why are you doing this survey and why are these things? And they can't find it. So it was easier to make it its own policy for ease of use.
Okay. And you got a lot of this language from
School Boards Association proposed draft policies. The first part came from our policy, and then the second part.
the North Carolina School Board Association.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, good.
So in A, we have the school system must obtain prior consent of a parent or eligible student. Do we need to redefine it because the definition or put a parenthetical that says as defined in 414?
Sure. Because
I know we pulled A out of 414, right?
Yep.
Okay. That's all I had. Okay.
Okay, student wellness.
Okay, we have added some language in here regarding the School Health Advisory Council. And this, the changes proposed in here came from the, I believe it's when DPI came and reviewed our, this policy. And we had a checklist and some other things that we developed in order to comply with the requirements. And so these requirements come as part of that review.
So we have one now, School Health Advisory Council?
We do.
And the board appoints it?
There's a board appointed member to it.
But it says under
Yeah.
A, the board will appoint.
Yeah, Ms. Sturdivant, it serves for us on that committee.
School Health Advisory Council, okay.
And I think that it's the membership, the overall committee is kind of defined by statute, but.
Okay. And in the last bullet under the CSHAC will, you mean coordinated the school level?
Yes.
So there should be one at each school and then.
Yeah, there's a school health council, I believe, at every school.
Okay,
Am I correct on that? Or Wendy doesn't know. No, there's not. Is that the overall committee? So that's the shack itself is when it says a coordinated school health. Okay.
So we should take that out.
Yeah, we can take that out.
Okay. There's just a couple places where council stayed.
Okay.
That's all I had.
Okay. We'll go to 4-24.
Okay. I don't know that
There's not much change.
Yeah. The most significant the only substantive change is that the change from 16 to 18, which is a statutory change.
So even though the state changed the adult to 17, this went from 16 to 18? Wow.
Since the last time we reviewed it, yeah.
Okay. I didn't have anything on that. Okay.
Me either.
Okay.
Okay.
5-7, the health education program. And as you know, we're working through Chapter 4. The issue is that this needs to be changed for the fall, and I just wanted to make sure it got done.
Okay.
So we added that one. There's some changes that were recommended by Ms. Garner and Ms. Trawick as part of the program.
Okay, I had no comments.
No comments.
That takes us through all the policies for first
Correct.
review. Okay, so I move that we send 4.4, 4.5, 4.14, the new policy survey, 4.20, 4.24, and 5.7 to the board for first review,
Yes.
right?
Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Okay, that brings us to administrative guidelines for 3-5, drug-free workplace.
These go with policy 3-5, and at the last meeting, I told you that I would have these here. These were developed by a multidisciplinary group, including Mr. Watson, Mr. Burnett, Sarah Emel, our risk manager, and these are kind of the implementation of policy 3-5. And the goal was, we had different procedures for different departments, and so this was to ensure consistency throughout all of our departments for anybody who is driving one of our vehicles.
I guess the only thing that we talked about before this meeting was the first 3 pages only deals with employees. I just want to make sure that we have volunteers where we need them, because we have non-UCPS employees who drive our fleet vehicles, and it's in there, but in a small part. So I just want to make sure that we've covered what we need to cover.
And I'll follow up with the group to make sure that
And I assume they did, but.
why they considered that way,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay.
Unless there's something different about those situations.
Anything else on this one? Okay, so this is for review.
Right, we don't approve administrative guidelines.
Okay, we will now discuss the 2019-2020 school choice options for middle and high schools.
So we do not have a handout for you, but we will make a verbal announcement this morning. As you all know, we brought forth the elementary school choice options to you about a month ago. We have been working with Scribbles on our process to offer those options, those 14 schools, to families, and it's been very well received. We're at the point now where we need to make the announcement for middle and high schools, and so based off of a comprehensive review between HR and facilities and looked at our listing, we are pleased to let you know that we have 7 schools that are positioned to be schools of choice. Those are Monroe Middle School, East Union Middle School, Parkwood Middle School, Piedmont High School, Parkwood High School, Monroe High School, and Forest Hills High School. So those 7 schools moving forward will become part of our school choice portfolio. They will fall in line with the same procedures in terms of the application process and lottery for families that have until the end of March to complete that application if they're interested in going to any of these schools.
The things that you have on Saturdays was choice, so is that going to include the middle schools and high schools now?
It will, yes.
That's awesome.
Yes.
So last year, we didn't have any high schools because it was late in the year, and it's great to see 4 of our 11 on it,
Yeah.
or really 9, because the other 2 are not, are application-based.
Yeah, this is really great for parents and students to have a choice. And I think it definitely gives parents a great option. And I would encourage parents and students to look at all of the academies and offerings at all of these different high schools to choose from. I know all of these have really, really good vocational trades and certifications that are offered at each one of these high schools. So 7 new choices, I think, is going to be great for our county.
And we have 2 what are we calling them? I'm sorry. I'm not going to use the right word, Tahira.
Showcases.
Showcases. Thank you. So we have 2 of them. One this Saturday.
Yes, the one this Saturday is here at the PDC, March 2nd from 10 to 12. March 9th is at Weddington Middle School from 10 to 12.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
And those are advertised on social media.
The elementary has been, now that we've announced the middle and high, that information will be out
Wonderful.
today.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you.
Awesome. That's great.
Okay. We will move now to 4-20, Lice Protocol Administrative Guidelines.
Yes, and we have taken what used to be the Lice policy and run it through our school nursing staff. And here is a draft that we are recommending would be attached to policy 4-20, student wellness.
Yay. That's all I have to say. A question that I asked earlier was, are we informing parents in the same class that has a lice outbreak? And I just want to make sure that that's consistent across the schools, that we are doing that, correct? No? Yep. We are not. Okay. Yes.
Just a little background, it was eliminated in 2015, the policy.
Right.
And so we adopted guidelines into the school health manual. And that year, the letters were eliminated as well, but we got a lot of pushback and they were reinstated rather quickly. The letters, as for any condition in the school health manual, are at principal's discretion. So if there is a case, that there is a letter that goes home to that student, but not necessarily the whole classroom.
I don't like principal discretion.
I would have to disagree with that.
Yeah.
I think, especially considering lice and that it can spread to belongings and stuff, I think the other families deserve to be vigilant in their own homes, to be on the lookout.
I think it should be consistent.
I would say for the most part in the elementary schools, they probably are doing those now. Secondary schools, they're probably not doing those.
Right. Well, I noted that there's a difference between elementary
yes.
and middle, and I assume that outbreaks are less in middle and high than they are in the elementary.
Yes, ma'am. And most of the time what we're seeing are sibling cases
Okay.
in those situations.
I would like it that the principals in the elementary grades send home something that there's an outbreak in their class, to be vigilant.
I would think we would probably go as far as defining that too in our manual, because there would need to be an overhaul of the school health manual as well as to reflect the.
I think that I get principal discretion on some things, I do, but in something like this, I think that the parents would like it to be more consistently applied. Because if you're at a school where the principal doesn't send out the note, you have no idea what's going on until your child starts itching, and you don't really pay attention to it. I think that vigilance will help with this if there's more outbreaks. So that's just my opinion.
And similar to what I tell my children all the time, I'd rather hear it from them than to hear it from someone else. So I'm going to apply that to this case. I would rather hear it from my principal or from the classroom than to hear it from another parent who heard it from another parent who heard it from another parent. So I think communication is important. I just want to confirm here, are we reinstating the prior policy, or are we just tweaking the administrative guidelines?
There weren't administrative guidelines before. This language is taken from the prior policy.
Okay.
So we're making it an administrative guideline instead of a policy.
Correct. You don't, and part of the reason for that recommendation is that we don't have other kind of infestation type issues as policies. We don't address bed bugs.
Right,
we don't address those other. So this, because it deals kind of with student wellness, would fit with that
But
policy.
it has the same
Language.
No, it has the same important impact behind it, whether or not it's a board policy or a superintendent administrative.
So we're comfortable with this.
I'm comfortable with this as long as the elementary schools are informing the parents of the lice outbreak.
So where can we put that?
We could add a bullet to the second part where it says, once a student is found,
Mm-hmm.
and then at the what I drafted is at the elementary school level, the principal shall notify the class to which the student is assigned. If that's okay.
Good on that. Okay. I would agree with that. Okay.
Thank you.
And so I also would entertain that this be sent to the board for review, along with 3-5, the drug-free workplace, if we could move that up.
We're supposed to get all administrative guidelines for review.
So this was under discussion.
You're right. You're right. It wasn't under guidelines for review.
I just want to make sure that this is sent to the full board for review, along with 3-5 drug-free workplace. We'll include 4-20 Lice protocol.
We'll do that.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you. Okay, action items to be sent to the board.
We also had this test.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I skipped right past testing. Can't forget that. That is so important. Let's talk about testing.
So there has been a lot of kind of media interest and discussion nationally about testing in schools and the role that it plays. We intended to talk with you all about this last month, but I forgot. So, and then following the legislative conversation we had with our legislative delegates, they asked for kind of feedback and a recommendation on, okay, if we want to reduce testing, what does that mean? And so we wanted to bring forth this document to share with you today, and I'd like to ask Dr. Bowers and Dr. Breedlove to come to the table to speak to this. So what you have before you is kind of a very generic memo for you all to review that outlines what tests are currently under our scope as it pertains to the federal and state law. And also which ones are mandatory by those laws and which ones the General Assembly might have the ability to end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Bowers and Dr. Breedlove and let you all take it from here.
Before we get started, I just want to quickly acknowledge that we notice that this document has federal test, state test, and what I remember from our legislative discussion was that we wanted to identify what tests are required from DPI. So I would assume that's what's under the state test.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So, but they also asked for us to identify which ones is Union County Public Schools administrating out of our own will, like, the PSAT or the PSAT and, or M-class. So, I just want to point out here that I think we might be missing a category.
We started with this one simply because from the legislative delegation, anything we do locally, we have that control and flexibility, but really intended to give something. We need to follow up with our legislative delegates. And so
they also wanted
They asked for
we
that.
can do that. But the purpose of this conversation, I guess, was to come back to you all to say, when you look at state testing, which is where they have control over that, what would we recommend that they look at from a reduction? We can include the district ones as well, but the intent was really to talk about what legislative action they could control. Yes.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and one of the things I'll add, and good morning, everybody, is also some of the times, Ms. Merrill, that you alluded to, some of the local assessments that we may be introducing are sometimes driven by state-administered assessments, and they feed into that. So looking to say, is there some reduction that can take place at the state level, will by de facto have an impact on some of our local kind of benchmarks or formatives, if you will, along the way.
And I understand that. Is there any testing that we do that are just district-based? like the PSAT for 8th grade is the only one I can think of right now. So I get that that some of the assessments are driven by the state stuff, but I just want to also understand what is truly just district. And I like how you separated tests between what's statutorily required and what DPI or something else requires.
We have
same idea.
And I think part of the conversation we've talked about is from an educational standpoint, the difference between a test and an assessment, because there are two different distinctions. A test, in my opinion, is kind of a post-mortem, end of year, end of grade, terminal grade that you're testing whether or not you mastered key content and subjects. An assessment from a teacher standpoint is an ongoing formative assessment that you have to have in place in order to understand whether or not your kids are progressing along. So we have locally controlled assessments that, an example of that would be the North Carolina check-ins, which is a formative assessment offered by DPI that districts can use every 6 to 8 weeks to look at different content mastery by subject. That is one that we're using. That is not a test taken for a grade. That is an assessment that teachers are using to progress monitor. That's an example of a locally controlled decision that we've made along with PSAT and SAT. So we can include all of those as well.
I think that there's the impression out there that there's federal, state, and a lot of local, and that what I'm hearing is there's not a lot, but that's what the impression is.
Right. And I think that's worth noting, as Dr. Houlihan kind of alluded to, is the fact that obviously you want to look at the difference between assessment, which is really getting kind of that diagnostic instructional planning, kind of that feedback from a student when they're administered, versus those which are tests, which are kind of this high stakes, let's lock them down for extended period of time under standardized testing conditions, to which you now have this regimented structure in place. This that's before you kind of references the latter of those two, if you will, and looks at the distinction between, from a standpoint of North Carolina as a whole, statutorily, and from the federal government standpoint, what are they obligated to offer, and what measurements must be in place at the end of the year. And that's really that first table that you find on page 1. And you can see that spans through grades, really elementary, middle, and high, to which there has to be at least a measure of assessment, both reading and math, that takes place across each of those grade spans. And then you see some science infused in there as well. The other thing that kind of is the outlier is kind of your CTE assessments, which have to be administered again at the end of each course in which they're offered. So those will always be required, just based on some of the funding and some of the language that's associated with those from a course content standpoint. The second page moves more to the state testing requirements. And those are the ones that really are established by both state board and then through the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. So you're looking at what amounts to about 35 total assessments that are administered just at the state level. And one of the things that is interesting, if you look at the very nature of some of those tests as they exist, is that they're not used for student information planning. They're not used for formative or summative feedback on students. A lot of them are introduced as value-added measures on teacher effectiveness. So in some cases, assessments were given for measuring teachers in terms of their effectiveness on students versus students' mastery of content and actually how they perform within a given subject. So if you want to go back again to what Dr. Houlihan again started off with, difference between a test and an assessment, does that really align with educationally what practices should be? And I think that might be more, that's a philosophical question in some cases. So that just kind of lets you know where we are. Now, one of the things, Ms. Heintel, that was included in there is the PSAT, not for middle schools, PSAT 8. What's interesting enough is that the only really test that's mentioned in statute by name is the PSAT 8, ironically. It's to be offered at least once in every school system between the grades, really, the state specifies between grades 8 and 10. Yes, ma'am, you're exactly right. So, well, yes.
I like it. There's people that don't. But I
in an effort to expand some of our college and career readiness offerings and really to align with what our college readiness plans are in place that support a lot of other district level opportunities, we do have offerings available to students to participate at multiple grade levels for that. You're exactly right. So that one is more, again, a planning, a student guiding, but that is not required by the state. But we are required to administer it at least once, somewhere across that continuum of grades.
So when you look at the state test and someone say, okay, give us a recommendation as to, if we have all these 35 tests, which ones would you say do away with?
So if one were to begin looking at this from a standpoint of what really is the purpose of assessments as they exist in schools, it would stand to reason that you would find those that don't align with gathering information on student mastery of content and goals and standards and begin with those. And if the purpose of the North Carolina final assessments is to get value added information on teacher effectiveness, then it would stand to reason that that might be a place to begin from a reduction standpoint.
So in other words, you would recommend we eliminate the North Carolina final exams?
There's 23 of them. That's insane.
So your recommendation would affect the recording of the Math 1 test, biology, English 2. Would that go away?
No, ma'am, unfortunately not.
Okay.
One of the measures that's in federal guidelines is that there has to be an assessment of reading and math in place in high school. Right now, the Math 1 / Math 3, I'm going to use the slash word there because we've introduced Math 3 in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
That satisfies the math component, and then the English 2 satisfies the ELA, a reading component. Biology's been included as an add-on. There's no federal requirement that says you have to have science tested at the high school level, but North Carolina, by virtue of their submission to the ESSA plan at the federal level, the Every Student Succeeds Act, they've included biology as a measure, so that would have to remain.
So this is a bold recommendation. I mean, all in or go home.
That's right.
So I really like this a lot. The one question I have is a parent of a high school student. I've had 2 high school students. How would this affect all the benchmarks that are given? And part 2 to that question is some teachers count that benchmark for a grade and some teachers do not. So let's talk about that.
So again, I can only speak from my personal experience, and I cannot share with what may or may not be
What would your
happening.
recommendation be?
If a benchmark is being implemented, the true nature of a benchmark in and of itself is to be used for the individual student in instructional planning and to get diagnostic feedback on what content to cover moving forward.
It's an assessment, not a test.
And that would not be included in grading if that is the true benchmarks are not used in a student's grade. If you look at the very nature of their existence.
What about the teachers that do?
Benchmarks should not be used in a student's grade if they are considered to be an assessment. An assessment is a means of gathering information on what a student does and does not understand from a content standpoint and should not drive grading.
I agree. But what if they are?
We have some teachers that
We need to know about it.
that are using it as part of their grade. I mean, it's being included as a grade. Some teachers do not. And I've recently, so I've been asking teachers, wherever I am, if I meet someone out in the public and they say they're a high school teacher, I talk to, I just want feedback on these benchmarks. And it's recorded on their Power School. I've seen my students benchmark assessments, and it never seems to reflect my students' grade in the classroom. And so, and then when you prepare for final exams, like a North Carolina, and this is why I'm asking. So when my student, and I'm only using my student as the example because we have, thousands of high school students. So mine is just one of those. But if my student is preparing for a North Carolina final exam, I will reach out and ask, teachers. Now, my student did not do well on that benchmark. Should he be practicing those from the Power School? Because we can actually pull up his assessment and that benchmark that he may have done poorly on, and we can see which ones he got right or wrong. And so my question always is, well, wow, red flags here. Should we be going through and practicing at home what that student missed on that benchmark in order to prepare for this North Carolina final exam? And unequivocally, every teacher has told me, don't worry about the benchmarks. They're not reflective of what students are learning in the classroom, and it will not prepare them for the North Carolina final exam. Unequivocally. This is the feedback I've gotten. So I'm just curious, if the benchmarks are not reflecting what the student is doing in the classroom, and if it's not going to help them prepare for the North Carolina final exam that you have now recommended that the state legislature get rid of,
why do you need a benchmark?
why are we doing benchmarks, and why are some teachers counting it as a grade and some teachers aren't? Where are we?
Are benchmarks required? Are they required?
And again, I don't know if I can say require. My understanding is that for every course in which there's a benchmark delivered and offered, is that the expectation is that schools administer those to students. So there's a window with which they are administered, and I know that is part of what is to be expected within the curriculum.
Do we tell our principals that benchmarks shouldn't be, to make sure that their teachers understand that benchmarks should not be counted as grades?
As a former principal, I have heard that communication multiple times.
Okay.
That should not be happening. And if it is, you've got Dr. Basin here, who is the supervisor of our high school principals. And so
It happens
listening
in
to this
middle
conversation
too.
and middle,
It happens in middle too.
I will say, from my personal standpoint, in my years here, we've never had a benchmark as part of a grade in Power School. And so that should not be happening. And if it is, we need to know about it by school so that we can address it, because it should not be happening.
I think today will be sufficient. And I trust that we will make sure that all of our schools know that. Okay, but just out of curiosity, are those benchmarks preparatory and written by the same people that write the North Carolina final exam test? Are they piggybacked, or are they written together? And here's why. A student will fail that benchmark, or it looks like, oh my gosh, they are not going to pass the state final exam. And then the state final exam comes back and they made an A.
And if you have a student,
do they even work together?
and I will tell you, some students freak out because it's discouraging.
And then
Yes.
you've got
It's-
anxiety going into
Right.
the North Carolina state final exam because they bombed the benchmark.
And one of the things I'll mention, and thank you, Ms. Merrill, for bringing that up. That really lies at the heart of the very essence of this recommendation you see before you. Having served at 3 different schools in this county, I have seen benchmarks and state assessments grow. I've seen them shrink, and I've seen them grow again. You talk about a metamorphosis, we have lived that. And now we're in an era where, again, based on what my understanding and what I've seen and the feedback, the data, and that which is yielded from the North Carolina final exams instructionally, in my personal educator's opinion, they offer no value. And I say that from a standpoint of they are not aligned with true measures of student mastery of the content, the standards, and what should be taking place within a classroom in a high school setting. And with that, we have now shifted to where they're being used again as measures of teacher effectiveness to look at teachers holistically across the state to determine where they fall with regards to meets, do not meet, or exceeds growth of students. And when that indeed becomes the intent, it's then difficult to then use them as good measures of student understanding and of content. And that I believe has become the shift that you speak of. So therefore it's difficult to align our locally developed benchmarks with what is to be measured at the end. And as a result of that incongruence, we're now seeing some of the challenges you've now referenced. So a reduction of such, again, as I kind of alluded to, I think reducing some of these, we're going to get rid of some of these other benchmarks you're now seeing in place, which will naturally have a tendency to return some of the instruction to the classroom in the teacher and allow us to get a better measure of what students do and do not understand.
So not only is it discouraging to students, it's probably discouraging to teachers as well.
I have heard that said.
It's a waste of time.
It's a great guessing game on what the North Carolina final exam is going to ask. We know that it's going to be based on the standards that we teach, but we don't get to see the questions ahead of time. So we take questions from another bank that are based on standards, and we select those across the board for those standards to benchmark. But once the final exam gets there, you know, the questions are completely different, and teachers are constantly playing a guessing game on what to do just because it's the great unknown. If a teacher was responsible for their own final exam based on what they taught, the standards that they taught, which they will all teach the standards, but I know what I said to my students, I know what the expectations are. Now we can say, yes, any type of assessment along the way is then based on what the teacher has covered at that particular time with those students, and it would be much more in line.
So I'm just going to ask some clarifying questions. The benchmarks are not written by the same people or prepared by the same people that do the North Carolina final exam? They're not connected?
No, ma'am, they are not.
Okay.
We choose from a bank that the state provides, but that bank is not, the questions in that bank are not the same that's going to be on the North Carolina final exam.
Okay.
That is a closed document.
I mean, they
Nobody
clearly
sees it
aren't,
until it comes out.
because if you're bombing the benchmarks and then acing the North Carolina final exam.
I mean, think about
But the other part of that, though, is your benchmarks often will include items that have not been taught.
Mm-hmm.
So you're testing information on stuff that have not been even exposed yet. And so I'll be honest with you, a lot of folks will like to use the word benchmark and say our kids need the experience of what it will be like on the day of testing, which I think is just completely bogus.
Agree. So if this recommendation were to go through, I completely respect and applaud you for acknowledging that some of these tests may be used for the purpose of evaluating our teachers, which I think we would all say we need to get rid of this, okay? But it's also affecting our kids because that North Carolina final exam is taking up 25% of our students' grade. So the students are being penalized also, okay? So if your recommendation were to go through, where would the other 25%, would you recommend then that the teacher have a teacher written exam, or would the counties have to? I know our county did a math 3 exam this fall semester, and we're going to do that again for the spring semester. So would your recommendation be that the teacher just do a final exam, or they would be exempt from the exam, or would you foresee that each district would have to come up with their own, English 1 exam, English 3, English 4, world history? I mean, what are you proposing? What would be the other 25% that affects the student?
Well, I would, just as an answer, it would be, we according to our own policy, 25% of the grade is some sort of a test at the end, or we go back a long time ago, a project of some kind that's a culminating element of the student's knowledge and understanding of the course. And so if we got rid of North Carolina final exams, our own teachers would write the exam for the district, and we could do a district one, but we would bring the teachers, representatives from each school, to write it, to say, okay, yes, we have taught this material based on the standards. My students know this material, and upon. So
we're actually creating more work for ourselves to get rid of the North Carolina final exam, because let's agree that it's affecting the teachers and the students. Right. Let's not just say this is it's negatively affecting the teachers, because it's 25% of the students' grade. Okay. So, if we get rid of this North Carolina final exam, we're going to have to come up with something to examine the student.
And I think that's a good opportunity, because number one, it creates locally controlled assessments, and number two, what do you do for those kids who do not test well, like I did on a multiple choice exam? I think it opens the door for conversation about things like authentic assessments that might be project based or product based, or anything. It could be a debate, it could be a speech. When you look at courses like AP Capstone, you often don't take an exam. You're completing a culminating project. So I think it would open up one way to say it is it would create more work, but I don't necessarily know if that work would be bad work. I think it would be beneficial.
I would think it would be like the other non-NCFE courses where the teacher writes the exam. And I get that would be more work for them, but at least it would give you that teacher some understanding of what the students learned in his or her class during that school year. My other question is if we got rid of NCFEs and would we be able then to get rid of benchmarks, or do the teachers do assessments on their own during the school year, or how does that work?
I guess you're asking if we should get rid of benchmarks, and as an educator, I would say we should not get rid of assessments alone. Understand what has been taught, have they learned, and if not, how can I go back in and help those individuals that did not get the point of that lesson, and remediate them as such.
Is it possible that the benchmarks we're currently using are not the right assessments?
You ask very good questions. All right. Yes. I would say that portions of the benchmarks may or may not align with majority of the benchmarks. Yes, do assess what they should assess to the standards.
Aren't quizzes assessments?
Yeah, quizzes.
Aren't quizzes assessments?
Are assessments, and yes, we choose the questions from a bank that the state provides that says, okay, here are some questions that align to what we believe to be the standards that will be taught at the end of the school year. But yet, if you ask a teacher, they are not all aligned.
Well, that's clear, right? No, I mean, it's clear that they're not aligned. I mean, for those of us who have students in the system.
It's hard to say all or nothing. I think there are some that are very good in aligned, but unfortunately, I can't say that all of them are aligned, and that's where the rub is that portion that is not aligned and doesn't really align with what the students will be assessed on from this closed bank of questions that teachers don't get to see at all.
I agree with that. And I believe that if a teacher is teaching a class to the standards that you set forth for that particular course, that I would think that the quizzes would be some sort of assessment to the teacher, whether or not the students are getting what each unit or each subdivision of that course is being, if they're getting it or not. I don't know why we would have to do separate things to get to that same answer, but I'm not an educator, so.
Okay, so I'm gonna,
What you were gonna say, you're not an educator. Oh.
so thank you for putting this document together. It's a great document. I think we need to take a good hard look at our benchmarks and where we're getting that tool from, and if it's a good tool.
What I was going to say is, I think regardless of whether or not the General Assembly takes this up and decides to strike NCFEs, that internally we should start taking a hard look at benchmarks.
Correct.
And whether or not, regardless of whether we have an NCFE or not, why are we doing them? How are they being administered? And is it showing value from an educational standpoint? And if the answers to those three questions are no, then we should not be delivering benchmarks, period.
And value to both the teacher and the student.
The benchmark, in my opinion, should be treated as an assessment. But follow-up to our principals needs to be, you cannot include this as a grade. It is for a formative purposes, not substantiated in terms of a formalized grade.
So going past this document, which is great, I think we might need to include some language from our discussion today about benchmarks, assuming that they come from the state. The benchmarks are written by the state or come from the state, or?
We write them locally.
Okay.
We take the bank of questions from DPI, and then our curriculum teams develop the actual test. This memo is intended to go to our legislative delegation.
Okay, so I like that, and do we need to send this to the full board for the full board to take a look at this and then give you approval to send to the state legislators?
We actually, I don't know where you are, Michelle. The state legislative delegation had a number of things they wanted to follow up from. So I'd like to have this packaged as one response, and I don't know where we are in the other responses.
I've gathered information from staff regarding any cost that the legislative agenda item might have, plans for implementation that agenda item might have, and I've got a document I'll put together, and I was just this was the final component of that.
Okay.
And since that was the most time consuming, thank you, Dr. Bowers.
Yeah.
I'd like to package this all together for the board's review on Tuesday. We can include it as part of the board packet as our follow-up response to the legislative delegation.
And out of respect to our state legislators, I want a third column added on Union County local test. Because they asked the question, I want to provide that answer. Or they're just going to kick it back and ask for it again. So let's just go ahead and give it to them. My final question is M-class. The state, I remember on strategic, because I've served on strategic planning and transportation technology, we invested, the state and local dollars, we invested a lot of money in iPads simply for testing M-class. So local money went to that. Yes, it did. It did. Yes, it did. We spent, the state sent us money to purchase iPads for testing M-class.
Right.
And because some of those classrooms are not state funded, we gave local money to purchase iPads for those classrooms for M-class. I will be happy to pull my notes from strategic planning and technology.
I'm not on that, so I don't. I just remember the state giving us money for
so they gave
teachers, right?
So they gave us money, for the state teachers.
Right.
But for our local teachers, we had to provide a iPad for that teacher. So I will be happy. So if that's not agreed upon here, I will be happy to. We did. and I will pull the, yeah. So with that being said, where are we on M-Class, since I don't see it here? Because I thought I saw something recently where there was some,
It's like a beginning of the year and an end of the year and a middle of the year, and some are required and some aren't required.
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about when we were talking about the legislative agenda? There's like stuff that's
correct.
required and
Right.
stuff that's not, right?
so where is M-Class? Because the state obviously was requiring it at one point because they sent us money to purchase iPads. Or
Yes,
was
ma'am.
it iPad minis or something for the M-Class?
So one of
It
the
was
things,
one mini for all the state teachers. So where are we on M-Class? Because I assumed that was a state test.
if you look under the diagnostic column,
Uh-huh.
in-class will be considered a diagnostic measure. So the state, yes, ma'am. So it doesn't specify in-class by name because
Uh-huh.
again, the statute or state board policy stipulates that it's going to be a diagnostic measure. We just happen to use in-class as the platform. So if you were to include in-class in each of those bold kind of underneath diagnostic first, second, third, that's where it would fit. So it's just, that happens to be, there's like a list of several
To choose
statewide.
from.
Yes, ma'am, exactly.
And we chose M-Class as the model that we would
it's kind of the
use.
universally adopted state assessment there to be able to measure
Uh-huh.
reading at an elementary based level. And the changes that happened were the assessment windows. I think Ms. Heintel alluded to that, the legislative update. They lessened some of the times throughout the year to which students
And they
had to
call
be
it
assessed.
M-Class.
Yes, ma'am, they did. And that's what we use, and in doing so. So that's where that change came into play. So if
Can we
I could put that
note
out.
that?
Oh,
Can we
absolutely.
note that?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, because if they're using M-Class, we're using M-Class, let's put that, because when I looked at this, I thought, oh, they forgot to list M-Class. So if you could just add that. So we are or are not doing M-Class, and are we going to recommend continuing that? So it looks like, if I'm reading this correctly, it looks like you're recommending to continue using M-Class.
And one of the rationales behind that would be that because of where it's located. Again, one of the challenges with testing, it really is who's driving the testing? Where is it found? You know, is it coming from statute? Is it coming from state board policy? Or is it state board policy, which basically then kind of gives DPI the autonomy to be able to introduce? So it's really a lot of different arenas. The thing about M-Class is because of read to achieve, and because of the expectation that's been pushed in statute that students attain third grade proficiency by the end of or reading on a third grade level by the end of third grade, the diagnostic measures that, you know, early on in K1, 2 drive that. So that's part of that entire read to achieve grade level proficiency program.
So just so I understand, the highlighted ones are either statutorily by session law or by the State Board of
Yes, ma'am.
Education policy.
Specifically.
Everything else is DPI.
Through the power that the state board allows.
And I
DPI to
understand
have.
that.
Yes, ma'am.
But separate from a policy from the
That's correct.
State Board of Education,
That's right.
it is the DPI.
Yes,
saying we
ma'am.
need
They're
to
not
do all the
specifically
NCF.
stated. That is correct.
Not specifically stated in policy or in session law.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, because I was getting confused.
Would it help if we split the state tests into two columns as far as, you know, what the state board requires and what DPI requires?
We could do
Would
that.
that help?
I think that would help.
Yeah, I think it would help me too. And then add the thing about M-Class. And if my memory is correct, maybe it was the state superintendent's recommendation to reduce the number of M-Class tests?
That is
or-
correct. Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
You're right.
from X to X,
Yeah.
or we were just going to do fewer of them?
Yes, ma'am. You're exactly right.
Okay. Excellent.
Thank you.
I think make these tweaks in two different columns.
Got
That would be great. And you can footnote, you know, which one is state board and which one is DPI. And then again, add the local test information. Because I know our state legislators want to see what we're doing. And I think they applaud us for, the ACT and the SAT thing that we're doing. And I think they brag about it in Raleigh. So, let's add that. Very good work. Thank you. And I know this was a lot, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, fun stuff. Testing, and I almost skipped over it. Okay, action items to be sent to the board. I don't know if you want me to go through this to make sure I'm clear. I have down that for second review approval from the board, policy 3-5-9, 10, 25, 35. And then for first review, policy 4-1, 4-4, 4-5, 4-14.
No, 4-1 is separate because it's fast tracked.
Oh, that's right. So we're actually moving that up.
Right, that will.
Okay.
Right.
Good
First and
catch.
second together, is that how it's considered?
We usually put it as under the first review, and then I usually mark in parentheses, policy committee recommends fast track.
So it does stay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And then for, so for first review, it begins at 4-4?
For first
I just got
review,
confused.
what we'll say on the agenda is for first review, or for review, we don't put first review on the agenda, 4-1, 4-4, 4-5, 4-14, new policy, 4-20, 4-24, and 5-7. However, next to 4-1, in a parentheses, we'll say, policy committee has recommended fast track.
Awesome.
That way it's clear and it gives
It's
you,
being brought the first time.
correct,
But we want to fast track
right,
it.
and whomever's
Perfect.
going to make the motion at the agenda, at the meeting, gives them that signal.
Can the board chair?
I think probably one of the other policy committee members should make the motion.
Yeah.
Do it.
Very good. Okay. And we are also taking administrative guidelines for review to the full board, 3-5, drug-free workplace, and 4-20, Lice protocol to the March meeting, correct?
Correct. And then also, no, that's it.
And then we are not taking this to the full board yet until you have your full package ready, or?
It'll be ready.
Okay.
Legislative follow-up.
So we are going to send the legislative follow-up to the full board, okay? For March. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff we're sending to the meeting next week. Did we get everything?
Yes, ma'am.
Will we have time to add the local testing and benchmark language to this in time for Tuesday? Great. Okay, anything else?
That's all from staff, ma'am.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.